Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Kate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 35. We're going to be talking about Facebook, the social media platform. Probably also be talking about social media in general, probably about Twitter and the movie The Social Network.
Advertising.
All evils.
Click rates.
Next episode, we're going to be discussing Nosferatu the Vampire with our friend Alexa Fraser-Heron. This one was your idea, right? You've been on a Herzog.
Yeah, I read
I
read Conquest of the Useless recently, which is his book about trying to make Fitzcarraldo, which is just great. I mean, and if you haven't read any of his books, the best book is really just interviews with him sort of transcribed. It's called A Guide for the Perplexed. And it's just a bunch of life advice from Herzog. It's great.
You got anything to plug?
Yeah, I'd like to congratulate our friends over at Comically Gaming on their 100th episode. They just they got started around the same time we did. And
oh, yeah?
They're prolific. They talk.
Why are we slacking so badly?
I don't know, man. We're just slower. But they have a good show. It's all about games and comic books, and they're a couple of the guys are like dads, so they sort of bring that into it. It's a real good show.
Again, the question: we don't have kids. Why are they so much more prolific than we are?
I know. You'd think they'd be tired, but they're rocking it out. But yeah, they had a 100th episode. I was on the episode for a little bit. They had kind of like everybody who had been on the show as a guest, I think. Congrats. Good to see somebody sticking to it, and their audience is growing, which is awesome to see that. And, I don't have anything to congratulate them for other than just surviving, but also shout out to the Popcorn, Piss, and Vinegar guys.
Yay.
Yeah, that's our podcast brethren.
What about plugging this podcast?
Yeah, if you haven't had enough of podcasts by the time you finish listening to this, or I guess you don't need to not listen to this. You can do what I'm about to suggest right now, probably. Go to iTunes, 5-star rating, or go fuck yourself. That's our new slogan.
I totally agree. And, we used to include in this some sort of like, hey, check us out on social media. But this podcast is no longer on social media. We'll be discussing that more in the body of the episode. But at the top, I do have to say, IRL, one of our listeners, Nick Tangborn, said, hey, you guys need a fact checker, which I thought was like really funny, and I totally disagree. I love that we get things sorely wrong.
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, come on. What are you coming here for? Like, I'm not getting paid for this. You guys
go listen to Faculty of Horror. They do real research.
Yeah. We're more of like the color commentators of the slightly academic horror podcast scene.
However, we do have a newsletter that I recommend you all sign up for. Go to scarythoughts.org. Over on the right-hand side, there's some fields you can enter your information, and we send out a newsletter with each episode with info about the episode and just recommendations of ours about the fascinating world we live in.
Yeah, it's largely a recap of my most recent and interesting Amazon purchases.
Pretty much. If you like Amazon links. And we usually give spoilers for, when we're talking about film, TV, and literature. We give spoilers. I guess in this circumstance, sorry if we spoil social media for you.
Yeah.
Because I think that the idea here is that we're going to be discussing Facebook as a horror, which if you're precious about your social media engagement might make you sad face.
Yeah, you'll probably survive.
You'll be fine. So just at the top also, I would like to propose a sort of impossible task for us, which is that this not just devolve into a bitch session about Facebook. Mm-hmm. Full disclosure, I guess we should also do a little bit of full disclosure about our relationship to the subject because, none of us have anything to do with the movie It or the TV show Stranger Things, but we do have a relationship to Facebook, not just that we live in the periphery of Silicon Valley and San Francisco, but that, we've both been on Facebook. Or are you still on Facebook?
Oh yeah. I have, we were saying at dinner earlier is I have a net positive feeling towards Facebook because I have net positive experience with Facebook. And, my relationship to it is just as probably what I would consider a casual user day to day, But on the back end of it, I'm also a marketing professional. So all these tools that everybody are suddenly freaking out about, like, oh, you have this information. How can you target so specifically? It's stuff that I've been knowing about and using for years. And one of the things that's a bit of a horror of Facebook is how unaware people are of what it is and what it's for and how it makes money. Like to see some doddery old senators talking to Mark Zuckerberg, and they're like, well, you need to change the way you make money. How do you make money? Like, they don't even know. Like, it's an advertising platform. It's essentially the world's most complicated billboard. And it's so weird that people don't know that.
I love that somewhere in everything you just said is just a soft breath away from, this is an interview with a real life internet troll. And you're like, I'm on it for the lulz. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You're using it for exactly the reasons that we're so horrified about it. But backing up a bit, I don't want this to just be a bitch session about Facebook, which would be too easy. And also, my full disclosure is the morning after the election, I opened up Facebook, and what I saw there was just the most exaggerated form of what I had been disliking about Facebook, that I shut it off and didn't look at it for over a year. And then finally just kind of did the nuclear option not that long ago. I finally closed my account the so-called proper way and deleted it completely. However, I don't want this to just be like me strictly giving convincing arguments for everybody leaving Facebook. However, I think that is the sum total of my expression of what the horrors of Facebook are. That it's a pretty toxic thing in our world.
Well, so this was your idea for an episode.
I sort of.
Yeah.
I think originally you were like, let's do an episode about Frankenstein and Facebook or something.
Yeah.
So there was some complicated thing that I was like, no, Facebook.
Yeah. Oh, right. That's what it was. I had wanted to do an episode about. I had just read Frankenstein. I was super hot on it. And
we should do Frankenstein on its own at some point for sure.
I have 3 secondary, critical books about Frankenstein now. Great. I've been going deep into Mary Shelley's world.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so because I was thinking about Facebook. Not as a Frankenstein's creature, which is a lot of people are like, oh, you make a thing and it gets crazy and runs out in the world and just fucks stuff up. That wasn't the reason why I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it in the book Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein, the scientist who makes the creature, he's kind of early on taken in by quackery, and then later on learns hard science, and then ends up fusing them together to produce quackery science in the form of the creature. And I think there's a lot written about the parallels between Frankenstein and Facebook and Victor Frankenstein and Mark Zuckerberg. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea to explore. And then I didn't realize how overtrod it was. But then I think your suggestion to have the episode focus on Facebook as the horror, I thought was very interesting, because we had talked about this idea for, co-writing a book or something like that where there was a very Lovecraftian company. And the more I thought about that idea, the more
Lovecraftian tech company.
Yeah, Lovecraftian
even more
tech
specific.
company. Yeah. And the more I thought about it, I was like, well, it's so close to reality. It's one of those parodies that okay, has the time passed for it even? Is it still worth parodying?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's make a movie called Idiocracy, and it's about how no, that ship sailed long ago.
Right, exactly. You couldn't make Idiocracy now, not because it's still true, but because it's too true.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I have no plans of shutting off Facebook.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I changed my mind. This is going to be entirely me trying to convince you to get off Facebook.
Well, here's okay. So I think that social media's biggest problem is not the data collecting and all the stuff that's in the news right now. I think its biggest problem is that it's rewiring people for only short form content. And because they're only able to absorb short form content, they're only able to produce short form content. And this is the problem that Cal Newport talks about in his book, Deep Work. And Deep Work, I think I've probably even talked about this book on the podcast before, but it's a book that would be in the self-help section of, in the anxiety at work subsection of that section.
Yeah.
But what it really is a very well-reasoned argument about that these things are just stealing time from you, and they're basically like slot machines. So they're triggering dopamine, and rewiring your reward system to constantly be seeking short rewards. So a like on Facebook or a like on Instagram.
Yes.
And the danger is that we're moving pretty quickly towards a society where a lot of the workforce is not going to be important anymore. You know, you can see with like trucking, you know, electric cars or self-driving vehicles taking over that. The way the Amazon warehouses are just going increasingly robotic. You're seeing more and more of that. And the only people who are going to be left are the people who are able to service these systems. And that requires deeper long form thought. And if you're constantly hijacking your brain with social media, you're not able to learn those skill sets. So it becomes a class problem at a certain point.
Sure. I think it's interesting that if I can be overly simplistic, you're sort of like, so they hacked an election. They're making people's attention span shorter.
Well, I think the hacking of the election thing. Here's another.
Me saying hacking the election is glib. There's a lot to say about that, and
like,
that is
I know that you don't have a straightforward the election was hacked thing, but a lot of people do, and there's a lot of people think that Facebook hacked the election, and that's absolutely not what happened.
Those are people who only get their news from Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, most people are really fucking stupid. I mean, think about the person of just totally average intelligence. Half the people in the world are dumber than that guy, you know? And all Facebook is an advertising platform, and you can pay them more money to have more access to more detailed demographics, and you can target ads to those detailed demographics. But it's still at the very base advertising, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much I advertise running shoes to you. If you don't need running shoes, you're not going to fucking buy them, right?
Yep.
Like, advertising only works so well. It works really well for some things, but even then it just nudges you, right? So like, all these people, like, there were a lot of people who were going to vote one way or the other, and it was probably a lot closer than people think. I mean, like, I'm willing to bet that if you had that election today and there had been never social media invented, I don't know that it wouldn't have gone that way. Still.
Well, it's interesting. This brings up something that Zeynep Tufekci raises about the election. She's the one who wrote the book Twitter and Tear Gas. I love her. She's a fucking badass.
Yeah, and
every interview with her is just like brilliant.
Yeah, and they're all slightly different too. A lot of times when an intellectual comes out and has a book that they're kind of touring around, they're like flogging the same subject over and over again. You're like, oh, okay, I've heard your routine already.
Right.
Like, one of the times I was so disappointed. I watched like a couple different Christopher Hitchens lectures, and he had like material. And I was like, oh, you're doing like that
stand-up comedy.
Yeah, like you're like a ShamWow guy right now selling your book. But in her interviews, she usually has some sort of slightly different point.
Yeah.
I think it's a consequence of like what she's studying. She's actively studying, and it's changing right in front of her. So every single day, as more news emerges, she has just a new interesting point to make in her thesis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I disagree with her a lot, but I do find that, she's actively pursuing these things. And she is someone who, it seems, at the outset believed in these social media tools as an effective means for social change, and got very disillusioned and has spent all this time figuring out ways that it is not working.
Right.
But the point that she raised that I was thinking of is that she was on some, I don't know, CNN or something, and one of the guys was like, it's just Facebook is just a really effective billboard or whatever, like simplifying. It's just like, and she was like, no, it's not that. It's not that Facebook can convince you to vote for Donald Trump, but what it can do is get you to think that it is urgent that you vote at all. And if you are voting, if you're someone who's going to vote for Donald Trump, but you don't think you need to bother voting, that's not a vote for Donald Trump. You're irrelevant. But if you can be mobilized by social media, not by Facebook actively mobilizing you, but if its tools being used by advertisers, whoever, can mobilize you to vote, then it has made you into a Donald Trump voter, because you used to just be a supporter. Now you're a voter, right? That these tools aren't about fundamentally changing the way you think, but rather shifting your expression, shifting your urgency, shifting your outrage into action versus inaction, or vice versa, or convincing African American people in certain parts of the country not to bother voting and lower voter turnout, for example. I mean, those are two examples of something on one side, and I want to be very clear about my opinion about Facebook. I think it is totally bipartisan. I think thinking about, is Facebook a left-wing or right-wing organization, is actually irrelevant. It seems to have the people who work there seem to be pretty lefty for the most part.
However, I would say it's extremely left-wing.
Okay, yeah. But I think it's actually irrelevant. Like,
I agree with that too.
Facebook deciding to like silence a few people, or YouTube or Google or whoever deciding to silence certain points of view, and people get outraged who are sympathetic to that side in some way, I think is totally nostalgic thinking. I think that is old school politics when it comes to the tech industry. The tech industry, or social media specifically, is about pushing things to the extreme for $1. Mm-hmm. It's creating valuation by moving people's relationships to media and each other. And that pushes things to extremes. And it turns out Trumpism, whatever that means, is better at an extreme than Clintonism, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Clintonism is extreme, personally. But so, like, a few things you said there. Like, I'm also one of the people who say it's just a big billboard, right? But that's not all it will be. You know, like that. What it's becoming now is definitely worse. Like, that's the thing that's so interesting about it, is they introduce machine learning and AI to it. It's okay. In the early days of Facebook, the data you're getting, and even the data you're getting now, it's just a data dump, right? Like, and so if I was looking to advertise yoga pants or something like that, I would just go in there, and the tools are pretty simple until you start paying more money, and then you have access to more advanced tools for marketing. But you still have like your message and your product, and for a long time, it's like, okay, here's your data on your demographic, but you still have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Like, you have to figure out. But what Facebook is able to do with all this data is you're doing the work to figure out what images and copy is going to attract people, but they get like to see, of all the people attempting to do what you do, what is working. So you're just one, say you're a shoe company, you're just one shoe company trying to figure out how to market with the data of like basketball playing men between the ages of 18 and 25 in an inner city in 8 major cities. Like, you could be that specific with your targeting. But what Facebook has is 20 different shoe companies all trying to do the same thing. So they get the data of the data, which is even crazier. And once you start getting like pattern search and pattern recognition, and you start building these like architectures of persuasion, which is like one of the phrases that Zeynep Tufekci uses, I think that the future Facebook tool will be extremely powerful in a way that the one now isn't, and it'll be very subtle, and like you won't even know it's happening.
So, building off of that, maybe let's go a little deeper into this thinking of Facebook as horror, and maybe starting with, what kind of horror is it?
Right.
Like, if it's a horror movie, if it's a monster, when we think of what horrors are, what kind of horror is it? I think it is a horror. I think that it brings a lot of joy to a lot of people. It brings a lot of people together. I think it creates a lot of, I don't know, people with meaningful employment, maybe. I don't know. It does have its benefits, but I think it's terrifying. And I think it is easy for us to not think of it as horrifying, because it's a different kind of beast than we're used to. I think that, for example, generally speaking, a lot of people have, let's say, very negative feelings about large corporations, right? And it seems that people on the left and right, both in some respect, don't trust large corporations, certainly not the banks, right? But those banks, I mean, when you think of greedy bankers, you can picture some like greedy mustachioed man with a top hat. Like, we have these ideas from our great-great-grandparents. That mistrust is part of the fabric of who we are as citizens, is not to trust people with too much power like that. But I don't think it's really actually sunk in the kind of power Facebook has. And so we can talk about like, the election, or what they've done in Indonesia, pairing up with the government there. But I don't think we really realize the way this company has its talons in fucking everything, and it's accountable to nobody, and it's happened so quickly, nobody really understands it. And not doesn't understand it in the way that maybe a senator doesn't understand how a hedge fund works, so therefore has a hard time legislating controls around it, but doesn't understand fuck all about what Facebook actually is. They only know it's a place where you share photos of your grandchildren.
Yeah. You know, your description of the senator there, like it reminds me so much of how if a Senate hearing had a bunch of bankers in front of it, you know, all those hearings are basically so these clowns can get 3-minute sound bites of them looking tough in front of somebody powerful so they can get reelected, right? Like it's just this lineup for these dickheads. But when it's bankers, like everybody knows that story. Like, why does anybody need to fly a private plane? Why does anybody need that much money? And, you know, those are just like old Marxist boogeymen, you know, but it's just like when you think about like how far has that outlook come that like ultra rich people can berate even richer people about having too much money in front of other people and people buy it like it's a real deal thing. Yeah. But when like something like Facebook, I mean, it's not even something like Facebook. There's no analog really, except for other social media platforms, I guess. But when Facebook is in that same situation, the amount of befuddlement from the Senate is absolutely amazing. Like just really just totally demonstrating a lack of awareness of modern technology in any way. But none of them were really able to knock it out of the park kind of with like a critique that like really sells back home. And, you know, I think I saw a lot of people on the left on Facebook, hilariously enough, so where I saw this stuff kind of criticizing Ted Cruz. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I know what you're saying.
Okay,
yeah.
So Ted Cruz, his criticism to Facebook was he was trying to get Mark Zuckerberg to admit or deny that Facebook was a publishing platform with its own agenda, right? And so to a lot of people, what it looked like was he was just going to bat for conservative personas on Facebook. So all these people whose channels were not getting love or were getting subdued or whatever. And on one level, that's just like a real dumb sort of move where he's like, oh, yeah, well, you took our conservative channels down. Doesn't that mean you're like a leftist pit? Like that's like the Breitbart level. But what he was really doing is trying to get him to admit that they edit and have a point of view, because that is potentially contestable in court as to their business model. So when he says like, oh, we have a position or whatever, it's like you're responsible for all the content. Theoretically, like what Ted Cruz asked him and his answer to it means that anytime any user on the channel violates like a copyright law, Facebook would be responsible. Like that's like the super nerdy law version of looking at.
Yeah.
And it not only was it like not understood by and I'm getting it slightly wrong, but like not only was it not understood by most people, but they thought it was something completely opposite. Like the story, you can't even get your head around the story.
Right.
And that to me, and the fact that people get so bent out of shape the more they contemplate it, Facebook is Lovecraftian to me for that reason. Like it's a horror that is like too big and too weird to even comprehend. And the more you think about it, the more madness sets in.
I totally okay, there's so much there and I totally want to get into it. But speaking a little more about that hearing, the thing that I have the hardest time with that hearing around is that traditionally when corporations get dragged in front of Congress, let's say the cigarette companies, right? The cigarette companies fucking double down. They're like, we have evidence that smoking is non-addictive. Fuck you. You know, like banks, mostly unaccountable. Oil companies, well, we'll clean up, and then they don't clean up. But things are very different. Zuckerberg is much younger than the status quo of, say, oil and cigarette companies. It's a new type of company, and it represents the social media era. And in the social media era, that is provoked by outrage and outrage culture. So much of our politics is sculpted by feeling, not about action, not about legislation, but about feeling. So this is why social justice and the meme wars and Pepe the Frog, this is all about lobbing feelings back and forth, attacking people's character, and then outcry about victimization. And because of that, Zuckerberg goes up in front of Congress and says, I'm sorry. He does something that corporations never do. I shouldn't exaggerate the point that never happens, but Zuckerberg, one of the most powerful, ostensibly people on planet Earth, can go before American Congress, to whom he owes nothing. I mean, he is untouchable, right? Like, he is unaccountable to them in the scheme of things, and he proved that by the fact that they didn't know what to ask him. They couldn't touch him. They didn't even know what to ask him about. But he came and he said, I'm sorry, we'll do better. It's true, we should do better. I'm sorry. And he's playing the social media game of contrition, where contrition has more value than action. And that makes my head fucking explode.
Well, you know where he probably learned it from too is when companies fuck up and they do a social media post like, oh, we're sorry, the apology in some cases can almost create a better feeling with consumers in the long run. Like, there's like trust built afterwards. Like, I mean, so say you are a cookie company and you have a Nazi working there and he puts his dick on every cookie that's going to a black neighborhood or something fucked up, like something so crazy, right? Like, so something so insane. If you nuke that dude, if you're the company and you're like, fuck this guy, fuck his life, like he's never even going to be able to eat cookies again, like you look better in the end, like from the apology. And like that's something companies never used to do. It's
Exactly.
only been done in the social media era, and it's because you have a hard metric showing that it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
I mean, you even see it with other stuff. Like, it's interesting how much more laser sharp advertising can be because of it, and just the lessons you learn. It used to be a thing with meat that you never took a picture of raw meat because the idea was like people would think it was gross. And it turns out people don't think it's gross, or people who eat meat. Like, and so most of like the high end meat ads you'll see, it'll be like a butcher shop cut or something like that. And none of that information was known before. And it's so weird to see like a guy use what his platform learned in the real world against the seat of power of the government. I mean,
and totally won.
It's nuts. And, you know, my big joke with like the Russian hacking for Facebook is like, I really hope they eventually put out an ebook, like how to hack, you know, your own election and business and life, because all the stuff on those platforms is repeatable for a little while. So somebody will burst out and do something really cool. And then there's like a follow up, like 1, 2, 3, 4 companies that do the same thing. Like, I just want to know what's coming next. It's going to be a big one, and can it be copied? You know?
I mean, this is part of what's really weird. I gotta lean on Tufekci here, but her analysis. But this has been going on a long time. Facebook is like in the business of apologizing. This happens incredibly regularly. Something comes out about Facebook. Zuckerberg apologizes. They change the terms of service ever so slightly and move on and run the business pretty much exactly how they always did. Their exact business model is all of this stuff we're complaining about. He goes before Congress and apologizes, we'll do better. There's nothing to do better on. This is what they do. I mean, this is like, we complained that you made bread this morning. And you're like, I'm sorry, I'll do better. What, are you going to not make bread? I think this is a bit like, you know, what kind of horror is this? It's almost like a series with sequels where the end question mark, it just keeps coming. It seems to get stronger with every consecutive blow.
Yeah, I mean, like, think about, okay, from the perspective of like a Fortune 500 company of questionable morals, right? If I'm just some CEO who's never really paid much attention to my social media team, and I just know I had to have one, so I just hired some low-paid lackeys or whatever, and I look at how effective this Cambridge Analytica project was, using this data from Facebook, I'm immediately more interested in Facebook. So I wouldn't be surprised if big companies that are sort of treated as like, just a thing you do. Because like one company, like when I worked at Whole Foods, in the earlier part of my time at Whole Foods, our social media was not very sophisticated from a data perspective at all. It was like kind of how it was in the early days. Like Facebook is basically how I got to be a copywriter, because I was working at a food company, this meat company, and everybody was like, well, you got to have a Facebook page. Well, you're the youngest person here, so you're in charge of it. Like that's how all this stuff started.
Damn.
And then, you were able to make business cases for what you were doing. So, I don't really want to clean that counter right now because I can go post about our sale right now and have like 15 people show up. And so it was interesting to use the tool from the very beginning. We're like, wow, I can type into this fun thing and then money shoots out the other side. And it's so powerful. And now not everyone can do that because you have to pay for that sort of access. Like for instance, our Facebook page, we have like however many followers on it. It's not that many, but you don't all see what we post when we post, because as a kind of a business site, you have to boost those things. And so it's basically like, okay, we had the world's greatest billboard and it was basically free. Everybody's hooked on it. Now to use that same thing is going to be effective, not only effective, but more effective than you could ever imagine, but it's going to cost a bunch of money. And all these appearances before Congress and scandals basically prove that the thing works great.
So this is what I was going to say with it. I got from Tufekci is that the way this all worked and the way the Zuckerberg, like, who, me? We didn't know. It seems to be wrapped around this idea that they didn't see nefarious use coming, that took them by surprise, that we built all these tools and couldn't imagine that someone would use it for evil. And then it happened, and we're so sorry we didn't see this coming. We'll do better. Is really baffling because he's they're all either lying outright, they're just actually ignorant dupes, or there's a part of it that I find a little more upsetting, which is, for me, being in the Bay Area, the hubris of the tech industry is really overwhelming here. It's in the people, in the culture, and certainly in the corporations. There's incredible arrogance and entitlement and hubris. That's what it is. And I think that, to its credit, that's what it is. It's creating a really massive industry with that hubris. But was there so much hubris and they believed their bullshit so completely that anybody could just come along and use it for their own devices?
Yeah, Facebook is the perfect Democrat. It's rich, it's totally fucking entitled, it's just fucking spoiled, right? But pretends to do the right thing, or at least wants to be seen doing the right thing.
Is that what a Democrat is?
To me, it is.
I don't know.
And maybe you vote. Maybe you vote for Joe Biden or something. I don't know. But what I guess more of like a. I mean, that's of course a caracature, but like
a caricature you totally believe.
You can believe in caricatures. That's the whole point of target marketing.
Oh my god!
Like you might not want to believe that women of a certain age like a ton of ice cream, but the data shows that that's a thing. It's like a hacky joke. That's another horror element, is how often stereotypes and hacky jokes are sort of proven as factual and
that the science of
it's just like a lot of times when you look at the data, and because one of the things you can do with this stuff is you can do lookalike lists. So Zeynep Tufekci talks about this in her TED Talk, but it's also just a thing. Like, okay, so say you want to target people. Her example is, say you wanted to target people who hate Jews. You could go there and look for Jew hater in the profile or whatever, and you would get a certain amount of people. But not everybody's going to admit to that. Right. But you can look at that tag and look at other people's, and that the other tags that term has.
You can get there whether you're trying to
exactly
get there specifically
right.
or
so
not.
Like you'll look for these other tags. It might be like, Screwdriver's first album is actually pretty good.
National pride.
Yeah, national pride. Or like, what's wrong with being white? Like all that stuff. It sort of creates this like cloud of ideas. And, Jew hater might not be there, but you can definitely reach into the pockets of fellow travelers, like using that. And that's what's interesting, is knowing how much an idea or a product, or, like, I mean, politics are just, ideas as products, with, ugly celebrities attached to them. Like that's politics right there. Right. But I think that's why you're seeing these weird alliances now, but between all these kind of oddball people. Like, what does like an open carry guy, a churchgoer in Texas, and somebody who really loves bacon have in common? Nothing, right? But like, you could easily see that person buying like an America hat, like any one of them. Like, and especially if it was like funny or supported the troops or something like that. It's like creating these like super tribes. Like, and then Hillary Clinton actually kind of like birthed them when she was like, oh, this basket of deplorables.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, it's like, we're all Eagles fans, like now they have a thing, like they have a banner, and it's like,
well, this is the complicated thing I think about all this, is that, and this is my biggest complaint about Facebook, and I don't know that I can articulate it so clearly despite it being so important to me. A sort of shadow of what you're describing that is very real is that it's sort of, you could almost go like, and that's why democracy doesn't work, because if you just know what everybody wants and they're able to enact it, it doesn't actually make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. But Facebook, because algorithms, and this is very true, especially of YouTube, right? There's the, and this is very well documented, that you watch, and I'm just going to go right wing here, but you watch a Donald Trump video, and then over on the side, it's something about Second Amendment rights. And then next thing you know, it's something about race. And it just keeps pushing you more and more extreme. And if you continue to engage with YouTube's algorithms, you get more and more extreme content. And this is just a fact, people's consciousness get pushed by those algorithms.
Oh,
because that is what you're
garbage
taking
in, garbage out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, because if you sit on Facebook, outrage, if it bleeds, it leads. Mm-hmm. So if you post something with certain triggering words or a certain kind of outrage expression, it's going to float to the top, and more people are going to engage with it. And that person's going to get their dopamine, and they're going to post like that again. And I'm getting my dopamine because I liked it and I engaged with it. And it keeps pushing everything to the extremes, which, again, to me, this is the part of Facebook that is bipartisan. It doesn't matter if it's left or right. It only matters that it is creating chaos that forces things to the extremes. And I feel like that's very opposite of like you and I sitting in this room laughing about our very different takes on politics. Right? It is the opposite of that. Like two people having a civil conversation could not be less like what Facebook is in its nature. And I think that is a weird irony, because going back to thinking about what kind of horror Facebook is, I think that, well, okay, the one thing that Zuckerberg trots out every time he's in front of a camera, every time he says, I'm sorry, we'll do better, is he refers to it as a community. Mm-hmm. The community, that's how he sells it. He probably says that word more than he says the word fucking Facebook. First of all, it's not a community, which I can get to later, but it is, I think, a thing where be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. I think there's a lot about the internet and the tech industry that is be careful what you wish for. And when you want to be connected to all of your friends all the time, turns out it's actually doesn't bring you closer. It makes you more alienated, right? And again, I wish I had quotes on this, but there are so many studies that are showing that increased social media time actually produces alienation. It does not produce feelings of connectivity and deepening relationships. And that's an irony, right? That the world has never been more connected, but you're actually just getting these surface bite-size pieces of so many people that you can't keep track of them. And you're mostly just being reactive to them as opposed to getting them. Yeah.
Yeah. Another way that Facebook is sort of horror is there's like a bit of like a body snatchers thing going on where you're like, oh, you're my really smart friend, but now you can't shut the fuck up about Bernie Sanders. You know, it's or like, oh, really? Like you fucking Obama's birth certificate? Really? Still? Or like, fuck, you're still alive. Trump has not nuked anything yet. We're all fine. Nobody's in jail for anything fucking weird yet. So I found that like, you know, my friends' personalities, at least online on Facebook, have been completely replaced by just the hackiest of memes and just like disappointingly flat thought. You know, and you're like, well, actually, that what you're talking about doesn't mean that at fucking all. You know, like because you don't know about it, but you're spreading this thing around, and like Facebook revealed to me how shallow thinking a lot of the people I knew were, and like and the same could probably be said for me too. You know, but like
but I think it's an online personality. I think that you know one of the sort of key moments, and I'm not going to name any names, but I have several friends who on social media have very much a you people need to understand, whether they use those words or not. It's this sort of like
or like we must.
Right.
Well, yeah, like that
sure.
sort of
like
language.
This urgent, accusatory, and if they're taking a very specific positionality, it's like, whoa, you wouldn't talk to me that way in person. You know, and with people I deeply respect, have amazing conversations with, value their friendship and their ideas deeply. But on Facebook, they just have their finger in my face telling me what I have to do. And I'm a little bit like, you're not the boss of me.
It's so weird. I'm like kind of the opposite. Like I'm very polite online and really like, hey, how are you doing? It's been nice to see you. Like, but I will rip into somebody in person. It's like, it's totally the opposite.
I think you have a slightly antagonistic profile. You might be very polite, but sometimes you're a bit antagonistic might not be the word. Provocative.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, no. I haven't been on social media in over a year.
Well, then how do you know what I'm up to?
I remember a feeling. It's the feeling.
The feeling. Yeah. But like, for instance, I don't post news articles. Like I can't remember the last time I posted anything related politically, unless I can make a joke. Like what I usually go for is a joke that cuts down the middle. Like if I get like friends from both sort of sides of political thought laughing at something, that's always my goal, is to make something that will make everyone laugh.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I apologize for getting so ranty, and I'm just going to throw this one in, that Facebook not being a community, and be careful what you wish for. I think Facebook also is a perfect illustration of how globalism, whatever you want to call globalism exactly, totally doesn't work. Because the idea of a community, we know what a community is. We know a community when we see it. 2 billion people from all over the world having access to you is not a community. Anyone with enough money having access to your behavior and knowing your behavior better than you might in a lot of situations is not a community. Eastern European hackers fucking with you with as much access as your closest friend through this platform is not a community. These things are exactly what a community is not, and sort of, to my mind, demonstrate one of at least the interpersonal ways in which globalism doesn't work. That there's a reason why we have borders. There is an organic nature to when people fundamentally disagree about the way the world should be. Oftentimes it's good that we naturally live very far apart from one another. It keeps us from really fucking each other up. It prevents wars, right? If those people and I have nothing in common as far as how we believe the world should be lived, it's probably best we don't have to deal with each other's shit too much. The idea that, well, if we just understood one another, like, yeah, that can happen sometimes, but not always.
Yeah, there's way too many fucking weird people with different cultures that they came from for anybody to even think about getting along on this planet.
Yeah, I mean, it's just too optimistic. And Facebook, I think, demonstrates exactly how that is not the case. Someone who's far away and anonymous, the chances of people fucking with you when there's zero accountability and zero moral overlap is high.
No.
And that's not what a community is. A community is a bunch of people who enjoy the same thing and doing things together, right?
Or at least tolerate each other.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with what Facebook is doing is it's made opinions more important than actions.
Yep.
You know, so you can get so mad that you're like, fuck you, I hope you die, to somebody about, whether or not Girls is a good show. I mean, and that's so crazy. And then you'll have in like my neighborhood, there's a Facebook group, like a neighborhood group that represents, the mile of blocks I live in. And you'll see just the craziest fucking conversations go down. Like, we have this woman who's probably mentally ill and she steals packages in our neighborhood. And she's just the known neighborhood package thief. I think she's back in jail right now. But my whole thing is like, it's a package thief. Cut a thief's hand off. Code of Hammurabi. I'm all about it, right? And that's just like an opinion just thrown out there, right? But her actual thieving is worse than my silly, like, oh yeah, I'm going to cut some woman's hand off, which is never going to happen. It's like a joke. And so people will make comments like that in relation to this. And it's amazing to see people almost completely forget the problem that we have a serial burglar basically in our neighborhood that we know who it is and steals thousands of dollars of merchandise every month. That is kind of a problem. Like, imagine that you lived in a cul-de-sac neighborhood and there was some fucked up red-haired dude that was just peeping in people's houses stealing shit. You wouldn't tolerate that if it was a normal kind of like 1950s looking ass neighborhood. But now not only is it tolerated, but critique of it is worse than the actual act. Like, it's just so weird. It's so weird to see people act like that. And then in face to face, I think you're right. Like, oh, nobody yells like that. But I think that's changing. And I think when you see all these like campus actions, whether it be a bunch of toe-headed dorks for the Republicans showing up to harass some trans speaker, or, more often probably like Antifa or something going to harass like a conservative person, I think you're starting to see the Facebookification of in real life conversation. And I think that's what all this extremism is that we're seeing all over is you're seeing people sort of change. And the concern with that is, have you ever heard of the book Breakdown of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind?
I think only from you previously, but
oh yeah. So it's this book that is sort of Westworld. The show Westworld leans on the ideas in this book a little bit.
Oh, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, so the idea of this book is that like consciousness as we know it, where we're like there's something in us that can recognize that you're having thoughts. Like, oh, I am having a thought right now. I am picking up this cup right now. That's consciousness. The idea of this book is that like 3,000 years ago, as early as 3,000 years ago, there was not consciousness as we know it.
You mean as recently?
As recently as
okay,
yeah. So basically, slightly before the time of the Iliad being written is the time period that they use the Iliad as an example of why they think that humans might have had a radically different thought process that was independent of like it's not caused by a biology. It's the idea is that the human mind was actually split into separate consciousnesses. And there's one that's sort of like doing the work, the day-to-day work. And there's another part of it that would be almost like the Jiminy Cricket sort of thing. And it was thought of as gods. And in the Iliad, like there's nobody has any sort of internal monologue in the Iliad. It's all the gods said to do this. And then the gods said to do that. Well, the Breakdown of Consciousness in this book has this idea that if it's correct, then why couldn't another like shift in consciousness like that happen? And the reason why this like bicameral mind may have fused is because of metaphor and language. And the way metaphor and language was used created the way the world is seen. And it's so weird to think that the idea of supernatural gods or whatever could just be a vestigial survival mechanism, and it evolves. And so I'm wondering, could something big like Facebook evolve people into a really negative consciousness?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's the type of thing that if this was the 90s, we would be incredibly optimistic in thinking in SF terms about a fusing of all consciousness in the world, and that it would sort of like level up humanity. But it's hard to not think of like Sherry Turkle or Jaron Lanier, who were part of that and then have since like done a lot of rescinding and become very cynical about these tools. And it's like, I would love to be optimistic about whether or not this shift in consciousness that you're describing happened in that way. There are definitely, throughout at least recorded histories, we see things have shifted dramatically in the very nature of how we think of ourselves as humans. And this may well be part of it. The question is whether or not it's good for us. Giving 2 billion people access to one another is incredibly significant. I wish it wasn't as toxic as it actually is. For me, a lot of my consternation around Facebook is also that I have a lot of friends in AA. I have a lot of clean and sober friends, and consequently I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of them about addiction and their addiction and their relationship to addict culture and things like that. And there is virtually no difference between an addict justifying their behavior and telling themselves the lies that addicts tell themselves, and people talking about Facebook when their use of it is called into question. I need it. I only use it for these things.
Right.
And oftentimes, okay, for the most part, my social circle are people who are incredibly cynical about corporations, act locally, try to keep things very small scale and personal. When I, just put one toe up on the high horse and go like, hey, Facebook is this multinational corporation that clearly has no accountability and doesn't care about you and is ruining this and this and this and. They're like, yeah, but, and then they make these excuses. And that's the funny thing about comparing it to something like cigarettes, where at this point, smokers are just like, I know what I'm doing. Like, this is fucking bad for me. I'm addicted. Like, there's no, like, well, it's not I'm not actually addicted. I just like the flavor. Cigarette smokers don't say that to themselves. All Facebook users do. All of them. That is inherent in what it is. And I think that what's easy to lose sight of in the fun process of like seeing what your friends are up to, and somebody posted a photo they took of the morning dew on the grass outside on the front lawn, and their kid winning an award, and that shit is fucking awesome. But I think it's really easy to lose sight of, like, let's talk about cigarettes and raw addiction like heroin, is the human body. You introduce it to heroin and it fucking wants it. It's biological. We have trillions of dollars invested in figuring out how to keep you distracted. This isn't paranoia. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is as simple as saying the bank wants your money. Social media, what does it want to do? It wants to keep you engaged, and it wants you to be sharing information. That is all it wants from you. And it has trillions of dollars invested in that, and it is applying those trillions of dollars into figuring out how to keep you distracted. Again, that's its business model. That's not a conspiracy. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And for trillions of dollars to be trying to keep you engaged in something, and you're like, oh no, I don't need to, I'm not addicted. I only ... I was on it for a long time, and I was pretty active on it. So I'm not, I don't want to be like, I've never owned a television and criticize TV. Like, I got off of it because of my negative experiences on it. This is the lie that we all buy into. And I think we at least have to recognize, when you have an iPhone, you have to reconcile, am I okay with the circumstances under which this was made?
Yes.
I can't, right. Well, you have to recognize that.
Yeah.
But if you're an addict, know that you're an addict.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the rant part of the episode that I didn't want to happen.
No.
Thank you for listening.
You knew it was going to happen. You knew you were going to get
That's why I
upset
wanted
at
to
it.
have this episode, is I wanted to go off about addiction.
Yeah. That's, Cal Newport, that's another one of his points about it, is that it is addictive. It's designed to He says it's basically a slot machine that never puts money out. You just get the little charge from pulling the handle all the time. That's kind of how he refers to it. And then he's a computer scientist who has an active, brand online. He's like selling books and doing TED Talks.
Yeah.
And he has a pretty good breakdown of like all the things that people think they need it for. They actually don't. It's like, like no news story that has been like leading, no news story headline that you could have read preceding an event predicts an event usually. Like for instance, like for the outbreak of World War II, like the top leading news were none of the events that actually triggered World War II, other than obvious stuff like, oh, the Nazis are in Paris right now or whatever. But like the idea is that like the news cycle, because of the way it's curated, actually isn't important for you to be on top of for the sake of navigating world historical events. It's just not, right? It's probably a better way of putting it. And that you're going to see and interact with humans unless you're a total fucking weirdo anyway. Like, so like, oh, I'm keeping in touch with my friends back home. Well, does that mean I'm not just talking to the guy? I'm just not talking to the guy in the cubicle next to me? Like where, like, are you just moving this sort of concern over individuals around digitally? It's just weird. And then for business, like even though I work on social media ads, I don't really look to social media ads for inspiration, because I feel like if you're looking and seeing an ad already happening, you're like, oh, what a good idea that is. It's already happened. Like you can't really repeat. Like lightning sort of doesn't strike more than a couple times and that sort of thing. Like, so it's like you're not really getting anything that you need from it at all.
Oh,
yeah,
for sure.
Did you have any experiences, any positive experiences with Facebook that you think would have been absent in your life without it? Like, is there any cool thing that happened because of Facebook?
It's hard to say for two reasons. One is because of Facebook. Well, yeah, if I was doing my social navigating on Facebook, then that's where it happened. But if there was no Facebook, it probably would have found another way, or it would have found something else equally cool. And the other thing is, well, if we criticize Amazon, which is, we could just as easily have an episode dedicated to the horrors of Amazon. If the question was, have you bought anything on Amazon that changed your life for the better? It's like, yes, but I don't think it's as if Amazon provided me with some sort of life-saving medicine that was unavailable to me before Amazon existed.
Right. You might have just gotten it, the same exact thing, even perhaps in a different way.
Right. I mean, I think it's sort of like, Netflix is totally amazing. I used to watch movies before Netflix. Did I have access to as many? No, but I watched more thoroughly the movies that I did have. I took them more seriously. I was forced to make different decisions and because there was less to choose from, I had a very different investment structure in the media I was taking in. Yeah. And I think that's what Facebook does as well. It feels better because we're being selective. It's the freedom of choice irony.
I was thinking about that Netflix example you were talking about. Like, think about a Netflix lifestyle versus going to the video store.
Yep.
Right? Like, I feel like on Netflix, sometimes I'll just go, okay, and just press play, and I'm watching something, and then it's some trash that or some stupid fucking show you get like 8 episodes into, and you're like, oh, I guess Ozark's cool, or whatever is the show du jour. And when you went to go rent a movie, you probably had a conversation with someone about like, what should we get? And you may have heard about it. You look at the back of the box, or like there's a whole bunch of decisions that would go into you having to get that thing, or a selection. I can't rent 50 of these movies, so I can only rent one of them. I had better make a good choice. This director's cool. I like this other movie. And so in one way, it means you might not be able to take it. You might want to not take chances on other stuff. Like, it's the reason why I had only heavy metal tapes when I was growing up. It's like, I'm not risking my $10 allowance on something that isn't an Iron Maiden album right now.
Right.
So you don't get into hip hop maybe like at an early age because of that. And there's positives and negatives, right? Like, because there's a bunch of movies I would have never seen otherwise without Netflix and that sort of experience. But that's just the passive absorption of content. Like, I don't know. Well, actually, here's an example. I've met and assisted people in their careers through social media. Like,
right.
I've had people reach out to me and be like, "Hey, how do you do blah blah blah?" And I'm like, "This is how you do it," and then it happens.
Right, but I will say that could have happened someone finding your webpage, which if there was no Facebook, you'd be more likely to have a robust personal webpage within a network of like-minded people, and that person could have emailed you.
Yeah, actually,
Like
I think that might even be how that happened.
And, and also the part of me that wishes I was optimistic about this is that I believe there are better tools. I believe that science and technology can solve some problems. I don't think this is the one. Or if it is, we're way off. Like, we're not even close to using it properly. Or its benefit to humanity is just not even close to what it should be doing. And maybe there's something in human nature that when interacting with this interface brings up mostly negative results that feel like positive results. Like the monkey hitting the little cocaine distributing lever. It feels great. What could be wrong with this? I feel great.
And then the vivisection.
Yeah. So I have sort of like it's like a two-part question. It's like I thought of a question, but then what do you think about, again, Zuckerberg in front of Congress complaining about Facebook? There are all these issues about like transparency and how data is mined and collected and used without your knowledge and all these things, and who is shared with. How do you think this problem can be solved? Or it's sort of a two-part question. It's almost like, but do you even think there's a problem? Like, I'm very divided on this because a lot of people, like Tufekci, honestly, wants government intervention, wants oversight.
But she didn't want it when it was like rallying her people in the square. You know what I mean? Like, she would have never wanted government anywhere near those tools when it was activists. And that is at the root of my problem with like the people being against it. It's like, you're against it now, right? But what happens when, you're super charismatic, I was going to say you're super charismatic president, but like, I mean, Obama used Facebook in 2012 heavily. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And nobody was freaking out about it back then. And there probably were even campaign finance violations when Facebook handed over their data to the campaign. Like, how much is that worth? Like, that's a donated amount of money. Like, not to be like Obama conspiracy or whatever, but like I'm wondering, are people freaking out so much about it now because of Trump? Right? Like, if everything had gone down the same, you guarantee fucking Hillary Clinton's campaign had at least as sophisticated.
Well, to be fair, Tufekci has spent, she came up through social media and protest in the Middle East. So the Trump campaign is actually late news for her. And also, to be fair, the objections to the way Facebook is operating are increasing, sure, because of Donald Trump, but we are also, let's be honest, learning more and more about how these tools are being used. And maybe that microscope is being held up with more clarity because of Cambridge Analytica and the Trump victory. But so I think part of what you're saying, well, yeah, totally. But also partly, I think we're increasingly learning the problem. It's not necessarily just who gets bitten in the ass. It's also that like, oh shit, it's all sharks, I
mean, I feel like, do you remember Kony 2012, that whole thing?
It's my favorite campaign.
Yeah. Okay. So you never saw a campaign work like that again. Because it just, like, people were like, it's like you see the magic trick, you know how it works.
Yeah.
It was disappointing as fuck. I bought like a t-shirt. Like I remember when I saw the
Really?
video. Oh yeah. I saw the video and I was like really just not paying attention to it really. Right. Like I'm just like, oh, this is crazy. It was about something I never knew about before. Like I was totally ignorant to like fucking African war criminals and shit. And I was like, man, like, oh, and you can just hit this button and it gives money to the thing and you get a t-shirt. I never wore the shirt because I never wear shirts for that sort of thing. But like basically I donated to that cause, right? But you've never seen anything like that happen again at that scale. And I have a suspicion that Facebook and in elections will be the same thing unless AI steps up really fast and makes it some sort of new dangerous thing. So I think that the future is people just get to the point where they're like, yeah, fucking Facebook is stupid. Social media is stupid. We know that everything on here is basically forced by corporate hands, and people sort of become like broadly conspiratorial and start to ignore it a little bit. I think that could happen, or the tool gets so advanced that it gets borderline X-Men mind reading shit. Like I think that's the two directions it goes in. And then Zeynep Tufekci's problem where she's like, oh, it's not going to be some sort of Terminator 2 Judgment Day AI that takes over everything. It's an authoritarian government that just seizes control of that thing and then has all the data on everybody they want.
Yeah.
It's
that strikes me as like totally likely. And that's that's not a conspiracy. It's just like, that's what happens, dude.
Yeah. I mean, it could easily happen. Like people think that like, the governments are robust or whatever, but like, dude, shit goes crazy. Like Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, right? That book details like the history of the Soviet Union and all this stuff. And like one of the things that's so weird about that book is most of the people who were in the Soviet Union would have never been able to predict that the shit came down ever. And I think it's probably going to be the same thing with companies, and it's probably going to be the same thing with countries like America. Like you could probably be like, yep, things are doing fine. 401k is just chucking along. And then next thing you know, there's bread lines and you're eating the neighbor's cat. Like that shit could totally happen.
Well, one thing I will say, and again, this is the comparison to like oil companies and banks, is that, yeah, it's entirely possible. Facebook could go horribly wrong. It's new and volatile in certain ways, despite its certain stability. But yeah, who knows? Like its algorithms could start doing shit that it happens so fast and it's so weird that it just alienates its users faster than it can be accommodated for and fixed or something. But I don't think Facebook is a too big to fail. They seem to be totally unaccountable, as we've just learned. But I don't think that Congress is going to swoop in and fix any problems they might have, like they did with the banks.
I mean, the
auto industry.
The thing about it, like the reason why they just can't is it's hard to even know what's being regulated or like what would you? Okay, well, what's the problem here? I mean, we've been talking about it for however long we've been talking about it. Like, would you succinctly say it's bad? Like, I mean, there's a bunch of different individual things that are not necessarily the plan or the intent of Facebook, but there are all these like ripples that happen. And so at what point does the law apply, right? Okay, we get in a car accident and it's my fault. Okay, your bumper's broken, I have to pay for your bumper. But across the street, some girl turned her head and looked and ran into a wall. Am I responsible for the person who just ran into the wall? And it seems like a lot of these criticisms that we're having, and really valid ones, are sort of more the equivalent of the lady ran into the wall. It's serious, but it's not the direct thing that you would regulate. So there's almost like nothing there to really grab onto to regulate.
Well, no, totally. And this actually reminds me of conversations we've had in the past about guns. Can we talk about this openly?
Guns? Yeah, totally.
Okay. I don't know. I know you're really shy talking about Second Amendment issues, but is that we were talking about gun control advocacy, and you were explaining like, look, here's why these laws never really work. Here's how the gun industry gets around it and like neuters it before it's even begun, and it seems like it's just a big chasing the tail. So this is accomplishing nothing. this is the gist I was getting from you. It's like you outlaw one thing, they just make it slightly different. You say this can't cross this border, it'll just come around another border. All that's really happening is legislation is making people feel like they're dealing with the problem, but they're not actually dealing with anything. They're just wasting everybody's time because they don't understand the problem and they're solving it in the wrong way. And it seems like this might be that kind of situation where so lawmakers are going to pass laws about what exactly? I mean, they barely understand what Facebook is, clearly.
Right.
And even experts could come along and go like, okay, it can't do this, this, and this. Well, then Facebook will just do that, that, and that. There's so much loopholage that, again, the accountability strikes me as being far too slippery.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's like ultimately, it's like it puts one person's message in front of the most receptive possible person for that message. That's essentially what Facebook does.
Yeah.
And then there's some features that allow you to send grandma some pictures, like also. Like, I mean, that's more like bait, really.
No, totally. I mean, and this is, if you were to go back 30 years and describe Facebook in certain ways, obviously with coloration, but not lie, you would be describing a dystopian novel. Okay, everybody's locked into this system that is slowly shaping their perception of the world around them. Very gently, but they all enjoy it. And they all say, but all my friends are there. And I mean, and this is another level to it that maybe I'll just let this be my last like fucking outright complaint about what I perceive to be people's defensiveness about it, is that social media has shifted all of our perspectives on the world. It has made, quote, all of us just a little more extreme in some direction, right? I mean, we all got our information from somewhere, and you are what you eat, right? And so if you got your information via Facebook, you can go like, well, I didn't believe any fake news. Like, yeah, maybe you didn't, but algorithms pushed your ideas around. And we're not blaming Facebook for telling you anything. We're blaming Facebook for creating these circumstances where you allowed yourself to be shifted. And so the thing for me, I'll just put it on this one on myself. I quit Facebook. But I know that Facebook made me a slightly different person. I know that my politics, so I can pride myself like, oh, I'm off Facebook. I'm not like that anymore. No, I'm the person I am post Facebook. I'm not, it's not like I just solved a problem and its effects are erased from my personality. Does that make sense? And throwing it on the other side, like,
Yeah,
you know,
Facebook
people
touched you inappropriately, and now you have to live like that.
that's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's for real, yeah.
You know, and it's like, let's say you're on the other side. Let's say you're a Trump supporter. Maybe you never would have been a Trump supporter, Republican or not, a Trump supporter without Facebook. And you can go like, oh, Facebook lied, I'm out of there. That doesn't mean that you're not where it left you.
Right.
The algorithms that push our behavior to even slightly more extremes
Yeah.
has happened. And I think it's up to us to kind of honestly claw our way back to the middle.
But I don't think that's going to happen because, you know, like it in some way, I mean, I think you're right to raise the gun control conversation in this because consciousness, at least if you believe bicameral mind, or anything really, is shaped by metaphor and story. Like the way we think about things, like, oh, the lip of that cup or the frame of that door, like the way we think of things, like our entire spatial navigation of the world even is based on stories, you know, like, and stories can be as basic as larger guy with club is scary. Like if you're like a cave person, like, and then you go like, oh, that guy over there, a big guy with club, it's scary. And so all of a sudden that becomes a thing, like a person who's bigger than you, it can menace you with a weapon. And, you know, maybe that occurs naturally, maybe it doesn't, but you're being told these stories, and there've never been a time in human civilization where there aren't stories leaning you in one direction or another. Now they're just happening faster, and they're happening more targeted than ever before. Like instead of like doing some sort of crazy weird Aikido dance before you do a wrist lock, you're just rushing somebody and grabbing their wrist and twisting it, and so I don't know that what's happening now is any different in any other way other than the speed at which it's happening. And that for sure makes a difference. Like speed, speed kills, as they say. So it's like, what are you saying is the solution is ultimately like, let's slow down the way we receive stories. Like that's kind of what ultimately any sort of restriction on it is.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I remember I had a conversation with someone, this was like 20 years ago, about taking lectures from school. This is when I was in school. Taking lectures from school and speeding them up slightly. I mean, now this is the most fucking given thing possible. Mm-hmm. God knows how many apps can do that. I was thinking, it'd be really great if I could take these lectures and just like speed them up and kind of get an hour and a half lecture over within an hour. Mm-hmm. And he responded like, well, no, that's crazy. The lecture takes the time it takes. Like all the nuance, all the pauses are part of the information. Mm-hmm. And not like it's an art performance, which, let's talk in terms of rhetoric, it is. Mm-hmm. But also, you need to process that information.
Right, and the processing is key.
And humans talk at a certain rate, and it's super useful because we are generally able to talk and listen in sync. Mm-hmm. Talk and comprehend in sync. And there's a velocity past which we can't comprehend. And I think that is most exemplified if we talk about AI issues about like, well, what if a computer can replicate itself faster than you can build it? And that machine, it becomes this exponential self-improvement machine. Speed is real and it overtakes humanity. And we operate at a certain speed and we can create things that help us get a leg up. But I don't know that we can create things that make us actually cognate faster or adjust to political realities faster.
Well, I mean, I don't know that that's true because you do see there are things that affect levels of IQ, right? Mm-hmm. Social upbringing, lack of lead in the water, like all the things that make people smarter. Like, so you can actually change an entire population's IQ score over time.
Sure.
With certain inputs or lower it even if you wanted to like take certain inputs away. So then it's like, okay, well, maybe humans can go faster and learn faster. But what's the upper limit of it?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we are in the process of doing this, but we're in the process of doing it slowly alongside a world that is accelerating. But is the world accelerating faster than the IQ mean is going up? And honestly, the IQ going up is nominal. Like it's not.
Yeah.
IQ is not going up that quickly. It's remarkable that it is. Like that's super fascinating. But it's not like I am infinitely smarter than a person like me 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. But you
it's
also.
It's a different kind of intelligence for sure. But
you do see other morphological changes though. I mean, like the average person is just
taller.
Like go to a Civil War museum or even a World War II museum.
And I can't even buy shoes from 40 years ago.
Yeah, they're just not around, right? I mean, so it would be silly to think that there wasn't something like that happening with cognition.
Oh, absolutely. But again, we're talking about exponential computations. Right. The human mind has no capacity. And again, I would love to be optimistic and think like, no, these tools are going to shift us into this like next level. But all I'm really seeing is this shit is happening faster than we can accommodate it.
And the speed, I think, is one of the things that makes me think it's just going to fizzle and kind of crack out a little bit because, think of all the other great tools that have been invented. And there's never really been an actual exponential growth, but there's growth after things that have been invented. But because it leads to another type of technology. But you invent nuclear fission, all of a sudden you have nuclear reactors and you can power stuff without coal. Great. But, then there's toxic waste. So there's always a cost to everything. Like what, though, I mean, I can't even imagine what social media is laying the infrastructure for. To me, maybe like a completely antagonistic global civilization of cunts. I mean, is that like what we're trying to get? And then you get like this new, like Plato's Republic Part 2, where it's just like the world is full of dickheads. The end. I mean, is that what it is?
I don't know. So maybe there's not, between the two of us, an idea about like what exactly can be done other than hoping that this problem goes away or solves itself, or consumers turn their backs or it becomes something better due to the way it's used. But how do you think that it can function in the world in a better way, or is that not possible?
I mean, like, so it's similar to asking, like, how can an AK-47 function better in the world, right?
None better. It's perfect.
I mean, and so there's arguments about, like, does the perfection of its design, I mean, like, it's not a perfect design, for one. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, it's this perfect killing machine. It just isn't. You know, it's an efficient killing machine. It's cheap to stamp out in Russian factories, send all over the third world. Like, it's easily reproducible. That's what's cool about it. And it shoots 7.62 ammunition out of it, like, super fast. You know, it's like, it's a killing machine, right? But someone has to do that killing. Like, this is the whole, like, oh, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And like, a lot of people like to, like, shit on that because it's super trite sounding, but it's also inarguable. You know what I mean? Like if you have a tool, it needs an actor, right? And I think that in the case of Facebook, it is basically a tool. You know, it's a tool for advertising, and it's a diversion for other people. It's a tool to entertain yourself. And it's really on the individual to choose how that tool is going to be used in their life. And then, you know, in the way that, like, an AK-47, the thing that's fucked up about it is it's really easy to kill people with it. It's really easy to have a bad time with social media. But without any sort of focus on what you as the individual are going to do about it, there's going to be no reform at all. You know, like Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, his whole thing is like, look, you have to decide if you're going to fuck away all your time on social media or be somebody who actually fucking gets shit done and does some cool rad shit. But there's no way he could legislate that everybody put down their bullshit toys and be more useful, right? So saying everybody should be more useful is, to me, sounds like no one should have this thing. It's sort of the same sort of corny, non-functional argument. Like, oh, we don't want anyone to have guns. People are going to have guns. So your desire for there to be no guns isn't actually going to change anything. All you can really do is sort of deconvenience normal people for the appearance of protecting helpless people from predators, you know?
Well, I think one way in which I kind of disagree with this, maybe you do agree with both guns and Facebook here, is that science is not neutral, technology is not neutral. It is not like the guns don't kill people, people kill people is inarguable and true. But tools are not inert. They're
designed for purpose.
Designed for purpose, and they lend themselves towards certain kinds of action. And we think of ourselves as sovereign, who can carry out our own will, but the world around us sure detours us towards certain behaviors and away from other behaviors. So, without blowing open a conversation about AK-47s, that, yeah, but it's never that simple. There's always this context and, like, you know, again, not to draw a comparison. I don't want to blow this open, but like, gun culture in America is a thing that doesn't exist in Canada. So there's that context kind of takes the guns don't kill people, people kill people. Yeah, but Americans are more likely to, and Canadians are less likely to. Just like Facebook is like, we can say, well, Facebook is just this tool and we know what it is. And like, yeah, but it sure makes it fucking convenient and easy to be shoved around and pushed around and guided by algorithms. It's kind of part of its nature, whether we, even if we're totally responsible and on top of it and sovereign, we're still in the real world where these things enact upon us their reality as much as we are
actors in our reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes
I'm being
sense.
esoteric, but
no, I mean, and I think if it does get like a little lost there, it ultimately doesn't matter, because part of what I'm really arguing for isn't like, oh, is a tool important, or is there like design teleology that implies some sort of moral action or something weird like that?
That said it way better than I just did. Thank
that's not really what like I even think is important. The fact is like, it doesn't matter if this thing was made to give you a blowjob or fucking blow up a school. It's being used to blow up a school, and a lot of people are doing it, and the cat is way out the bag. So you pretending to care and pretending to do things does not make the problem better. Like, and so this is the whole thing with gun control, is like all the shit. Like, now you're getting people who are coming out and being like, yeah, we want to take all the guns, right?
Oh,
and
sure.
So that conversation is now live, and that's actually, in a way, proves the NRA's concerns. Or like their state concerns is like, like, look, you always want to do this, this, and this, and it always leads to this. And now you have people, enough of them loud on the other side, being like, yeah, we're fucking coming for those guns. One, good luck with that. Two, like, you've just reinforced the NRA's position. Like, despite all this, like, recent school shooting and stuff, they have been taking in record numbers of donations the entire time. So the best thing to ever happen to the NRA is a bunch of kids being manipulated by CNN to like be extra freaked out about something, And I don't mean that. I'm not saying that they're conspiracy theorists or anything.
Sure.
What I mean is that, like,
that's the way this works.
Like, I don't think the news companies who are covering this give a fuck about kids being killed. Like, I don't think they do at all. I think they love that kids being active for a cause that a lot of people can get behind sells breakfast cereal, and I just think that's just the way it is. Do normal people, like, is what happened to those kids terrible? Yeah, of course. They should all have fucking free scholarships to wherever they want just for having fucking dealt with that. They're going to have a hard time in life. But they're just like opportunistically like hijacking the shit, because like things are for sale. The advertising. Like, if I could snap my fingers and kill one thing in the world, it would be advertising. And so like, it's like, it wouldn't be Facebook. It wouldn't be like a tool where you can talk to friends and yell at people or whatever. It's the money put into advertising is so extreme. I mean, I consider, like, it's got to be like trillions of dollars a year. And you think about all the really smart people sucked up into making like 30-second video ads and all this nonsense. It's like, to me, the big problem is that the weight of all the smartest people alive are being put towards that purpose. Like, that to me is the real big problem. Like, in the way the gun control is, like, why do people want to kill each other? Why do people freak out? Because we have a fucking loser problem in America. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of fucking losers who are not being dealt with by like the system in any sort of normal way, and they freak out and they go do terrible shit. And you have like, like all these kids or all these like terrorist sympathizers, what they all have in common is their lives aren't going the way they want them to go. And they feel like they have no power or control, and they probably don't, right? And that is the actual problem. It's not that there's this thing that, like, even if you have a thing that was like purpose built for killing, which you do, it's like the heart of people is the problem. And I think like you have to address that. And then, so the real problem with Facebook is that advertising is a thing, and it makes $1 bazillion. So like, what are you going to regulate? Advertising? No, you're never going to. So you can have a fake regulation on top that does nothing. So I think this shit is here to stay. That's
for sure.
Yeah.
Until it's not like it's going to be boycotted to death or something.
Yeah.
And that's the weird thing is, I've had a lot of conversations about Facebook with a lot of like people on my team, without disrespecting the opinions of some of the people that I've talked about. And again, Zeynep Tufekci, this idea like, well, it needs to be regulated. Well,
what are you regulating?
What are you regulated? And if you don't trust it, why do you use it? Actually, is a sort of like question for me. Like, I mostly have worked at independent businesses my whole life. Totally like grew up on Fugazi and indie record stores and of course to me, like, I don't like this multinational corporation. Bye, as best I can. And, I'm a hypocrite. I have an iPhone, but I sort of feel like I'm just going to do the best I can,
there's a certain level of hypocrisy that I can't cross. And
Yeah.
thinking like, I need the government to regulate this thing that I use regularly, even though I know that the government would be trying to regulate exactly the thing that I use it for, is very perplexing to me. And that's when I start to feel a little bit more libertarian.
Yeah, I mean, even like where you sit, if you even choose to sit someplace politically, Facebook's weird to navigate because like the libertarian part of you goes, they built this big thing. It's pumping money into people's pockets and it's fucking huge and it's great and it's not really a monopoly because there's nothing else like it and it's not in anyone's way, blah, 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 blah. Like there's all that going on. But then you're like, okay, they're really suppressing conservative viewpoints for real. Like it's just like the way it goes. Like a lot of the review process, it's not an algorithm. It's actually people looking at stuff going like, yeah, fuck that, or yay, nay. Like the worst job at Facebook or as a contractor is like the people who have to filter through terrible images, like the reported images to decide. Like that shit is so dark.
Yeah.
But so yeah, like so then you could be like maybe like conservatively against Facebook because of who owns it, or you know, like it's just so weird. Yeah, it like sits in this unusual spot. I think it's like what it is just too big to even comprehend, and that brings it to its Lovecraftian thing. Like, you know, something else we were talking about earlier tonight was whether or not in the Zuckerberg deposition or whatever it was, does he really not know that much about his company? And it's like
he often plays dumb.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So like for sure he could be playing dumb, but then I work with people who are super brilliant with their code, but are really just don't get other big picture stuff. Like, and so, you know, is that real? Like maybe he's built this thing that is just too big for Zuckerberg. You know, it's just, and if it's too big for the dude that created it and the guy is undeniably smart, I mean, what the fuck? You've unleashed this thing onto the world. And people talk about AI being like crazy. Like this has already disrupted human civilization so much. Like, why would you make anything else? Like maybe fix this bullshit before you roll out the fucking robot army, you know?
Yeah.
But the fact that this shit doesn't work makes me believe that the robot army is never going to happen. You know, like it's just weird. It's you're caught between these ideas of futurism where everything can be solved by technology and reality, which is you look around and you're like, man, technology really fucked that up right there. I mean, just San Francisco is a perfect example. The city is fucked up. And not, you know, there was a moment when I was like, yeah, you know, who cares? Just, you know, younger people with scooters are moving here and displacing bartenders. Too bad, so sad, you know. But now you look at it, you're like, whoa, this is out of control. How fucked up this is.
Yep.
I don't know. And then I personally feel so weird because I've, you know, I was a bartender here for longer than I've worked in tech, and you know, so I see kind of like both sides of it, and there aren't really sides. That's the thing about it. There's like super elites and the rest of us.
Yeah,
and
leftovers.
Yeah, leftovers, and
I think one of the many themes through Scary Thoughts is I complain about nostalgia, but my being here is nostalgic in a weird way. Like it's this enforced nostalgia because if anyone, just a tourist, someone who just got here for some reason, looked around, they'd see like tech, and see me and be like, that person, God, how long have they been here? You know, like I work in this bar that's having its 25th year anniversary this week, and I'm still living in the same damn apartment because I'm stuck here because of rent control. And there are so many things about like that I would not trade for anything. And I don't want to sound like I'm complaining because a lot of this is great for me. But the city has like completely changed, and I'm still here. And it's not like a regular city where people come and go. This is a place where people are ejected and replaced by normies. And God bless them, they got to live somewhere. But it's a monoculture. And it makes me this sort of like, you know, when I see other people who've been here for more than 20 years, it's not the sort of small town recognition like, hey, what's up? How you doing?
Yeah.
It's this like, still here, which is sad.
I do sort of disagree a little bit on the monoculture thing. I think it's just a totally different culture in the way that like Facebook is a totally different problem that's just so weird. Like like I think about my office that I work in. On paper, it's crazy diverse. Like people are from all these different countries. They have all kinds of different backgrounds, different stuff. But then like you look at them and you're like, man, it's like they're formed into the shape of a normie. They're not actually normies. They're not like people who just grew up normal. Like because they stay where they grew up. They stay in the suburbs. They're like, all right, went to school here. This is great. Like it's not that terrible life. Here, it's like you have young people who are being compressed into this really bullshit sort of success. Like I feel like the success of the 80s was more honest. Like you'd be like, I moved there to be rich so I could fucking destroy everything I could with cocaine and Lamborghinis. You know, like that, I feel like if you had that attitude, you understand that type of arrogance. But here you have this like thing where you're like, oh, I'm obviously very smart because I'm being paid all this money, but I don't want to look like I can afford all this cool REI shit. So I'll just wear like, you know, Converse. It's this weird success that's ashamed of itself, but also entitled to itself.
Well, that's Zuckerberg in his hoodie.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the weirdest thing. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like if I had Zuckerberg's money, I would be wearing fucking alligator shoes every goddamn day, and I'd have like 4 supermodels on each side of me, just wearing like latex, whatever, just because I could. You know, it just seems weird.
You have the weirdest priorities. I swear to God.
Well, you know, you want to look good and have fun. That seems like a normal priority.
That didn't help. Yeah.
But I guess what I mean is, at the height of it, like, you know, you're the king of the shit. Zuckerberg is, you know, he's like the Queen Victoria of tech. And that's it. That's what you do. You know, you wear a gray hoodie, get your hair cut at Supercuts. I mean, what the fuck? Like, I don't know.
We haven't even talked about The Social Network.
The movie?
Yeah.
Skippable.
Okay.
I mean,
that
like,
was easy.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Done.
Well, I mean,
it was very interesting revisiting that, and then he's dragged before Congress.
Yeah, it's my wife and I often talk about how most people are so business illiterate that the way they think business and even law is conducted is how it's conducted in movies. And because you'll see, do you remember? You are not a fan of Scorsese, but in The Wolf of Wall Street, have you seen The Wolf of Wall Street?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a scene where the guy's like, "Sell me this pen."
Yeah.
People think that's how sales is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even that guy Jordan Belfort, he goes around and does like actual seminars on how to sell the fucking pen. But I always laugh, like there's a tone of guys who are like, I'm in business. And then you see it a lot in the cannabis business right now, like guys who've like, they perfected the art of black market sales. They're master cultivators. They're badasses in the rule set that they were playing under. But now they're playing under a slightly different rule set that requires like more like corporate skills. And you have a little bit of that, like, so I'll show you how to sell. Like the guys, like they put on a front of business idea, business acumen, and it sort of looks like how it does in movies. And so you wonder, like, did that courtroom scene in The Social Network where he's like, well, I'm only going to give you like 2% of my attention because that's all you deserve because you're a fucking loser. And I got way more important shit to do at Facebook. Is that running through his mind? Is it running through other people's minds when they're watching that? Like, so it's like, has that movie, would it have influenced things? Is it why he's used the extra contrition? You know what I mean? Because he doesn't want to be perceived as like I think if he stepped in front of Congress and was just like, fuck you, it would have been way cooler. But you also see like where power really lies, though, is that's what that dude Martin Shkreli did.
Yes.
It's like he got up there and he's like, I plead the fifth. And like they were like, you're not under oath. He's like, I plead the fifth. Like he was just fucking with them like a hardcore troll. And that dude's doing time now, you know, for essentially for a joke, right? Like his sentence was more or less enhanced because of the alleged threat he made to Hillary Clinton, which was basically a joke, right? He's like, oh, I'll give $5,000 for anybody who can get me a strand of Hillary Clinton's hair. Like if I told you that at late night at a bar, you would just laugh because you would think it was so super fucking absurd, but it gets used in court against him. It's totally crazy, but fuck that guy anyway. Like I'm not siding with him. The whole reason why I even bring him up is you really think like, oh, maybe Zuckerberg has all this power because he made all these old dudes look stupid, but the government is ultimately going to be able to fuck you if it wants to. Like they could tear Facebook apart if they wanted to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's so crazy, that people want to give more power to the thing that can destroy even something as big as Facebook. Why the fuck would you want to do that?
I don't know. I feel
It's
like
clearly not fair. It's clearly fucked up. I mean, look at the current leadership, right? Like that. If anybody believes in the fucking arc of justice bending anywhere, it bends up your ass is where it goes. It's like there's no fucking arc of justice. Like there's just chaos and occasional opportunity that drives people to do a thing that results in less death. That's basically the world. I don't know.
I think that should be the last thing said on our final episode of Scary Thoughts. That was beautiful.
I don't know if it was beautiful, but
You have anything else?
no, I mean, I guess like when it comes down to is like, it seems the relative power of a tool will reveal what's bad about humans. Like the more powerful the tool is, the worse you're going to feel about people. It's like the Ring of Gyges, or which is what the Ring and Lord of the Rings is based on. It's like you have this thing that gives you power, you're going to do something fucked up with it, and I don't know that that's ever not going to be the case.
Yeah, and part of I don't know if this is exactly what you're saying, but also like the interesting thing about Facebook is it democratizes the power to say shit to anybody, and Twitter, and what you get is call out culture and the alt-right trolling people and social justice warriors calling out the weirdest shit and everybody throwing their opinion, and it's sticking for random reasons that basically would not have happened 40 years ago, but because we've given everybody this weird power and it feels righteous.
Yeah.
Because we all feel like victims. Everybody believes they're a victim, and everybody believes that there's a boot on the back of their neck. And now everybody feels like
that's just Marxists. Like I'm not a victim.
You're the only one. Oh, come on. Like the Trump election is predicated on underdogism.
Yeah, but I didn't vote for Trump. I mean, like I'm not.
I'm not talking about you.
Yeah.
You're the exception to every fucking rule, Chad. Like I don't even understand you. But we all feel like the underdog. We all feel misunderstood. And those of us who are genuinely marginalized, like social media gives you this opportunity to speak truth to power, to not take any shit. And it feels powerful because it is a kind of power. But I've seen interviews with people about social media defending its power even still, and going like, yeah, we didn't used to be able to speak truth to power, and now we have this tool, and we can we can call people out on their bullshit and expose them for who they are. And to my mind, this is like saying, I'm a boxer and I used to be constrained by gloves, but in a no gloves fight, I can punch them with my bare knuckles, and like I can finally fight like I really always was meant to fight. And like, yeah, but the other person doesn't have gloves either. This isn't, you didn't level up. It's just worse. It's just more violent now. Like just because you have access to greater violence doesn't mean you're now winning. You're just in a higher stakes fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, but then again, are the stakes that high? Are they really that higher? Right. Because like for all the speak truth to power possibilities, basically like this is what you can do with social media. You can get somebody fired, you can get a book deal, or you can sell shit. That's pretty much it. I mean,
right. But again, in the politics of feeling, you can make someone think their life is in danger and silence them. And when we're talking about, let's say, a lot of people who are who are struggling, let's say in America, a lot of people struggling, feeling powerless and having strong opinions and feeling marginalized, through social media, they can wield power. And one of those powers is to silence people and make them fear, Yeah.
But I mean,
and that's real. That's not to be dismissed.
But I don't think that dynamic is unnatural necessarily. You know what I mean? Because ultimately all anybody ever wants to do is like be the boot, not the face. Nobody's really tried. Like so much of the activism that you see on social media is like, fuck them and I'll come after them. It's like, it's not about conciliation. It's about getting yours in whatever particular aesthetic manner that looks like. You know what I mean?
It feels like power, and therefore it is power, but it's very misleading.
Yeah. It's weird because it feels like certain groups have more power with social media than they would have ever had. Right?
Absolutely.
For instance, like you could legitimately fuck up a company if you're like 5 trans people with some spirit. You know what I mean? Like if something happened to one of you, and that was never, ever the case in history.
Absolutely true.
And so, but what's kind of weird though is with the exception of the company that owns the platform, all the other companies have the same level of power with social media. Like really, except for you can sort of like spend more money and get your message more out there, which is for sure powerful. But that was something that companies were always able to do. You know what I mean? You could take out, full page New York Times ad or whatever. It's like, yeah, there's some different levels of scale, but the difference now is like the bottom of the pyramid now has the ability to hit at the top, which sort of destabilizes the traditional power. But the new power is kind of comes in on the flank of both of them because it's like Facebook benefits from the disruption of the power, but it will ultimately remain on top. So it's just like everyone is going to be fucked except for the company. And the richer it gets, the more it's able to defend itself, which is the other crazy thing. Like Facebook this last quarter spent more money on lobbyists than I think anyone ever has or something like that. And then the other thing that used to always be the thing with tech companies is like, oh, somebody's just going to, every tech company is just a new invention away from being destroyed. Like Facebook came and destroyed MySpace. But that's only because MySpace didn't have enough money to buy Facebook when it came up. Maybe they did, but like Zuckerberg wouldn't take the money for it. Whereas like now Facebook has so much money, they can eat all the comers to the table as they come up. And that's weird, man. Like I don't know where that leads. It definitely doesn't benefit marginalized people. Like, yeah, you get like, you take a couple scalps, but so the fuck what?
Yep.
Like you've just created another totally insidious monster. It's probably worse because you can't get your head around it. Like you can't even figure out where it's bad. Like you look at an old coot in a suit with a monocle, of course, the villain, right? But when everybody inside the company is on your side, but doing shit that is fucking your side up, like what is that?
Yeah. It also reminds me when we were talking about Ouija, Origin of Evil, and I brought up the Witchboard. Progressive entrapment.
I mean, it's basically what it is.
Such a useful term.
Yeah. Well, I, for one, am not giving up my Facebook page.
And why should you?
Yeah. I enjoy its devious diversions. I'm so glad Facebook and Yelp and whatnot weren't really much of a thing when I was bartending.
Yeah, it's probably for the better.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so weird, like to see like just misbehaving customers, or not even customers, but like you see like people just like 1 minute of rage, and then all of a sudden they're like business is over or whatever. But sometimes I think there's definitely times when it's totally deserved. Like, like I've been in fights with people and never like used racial slurs against them, and it's as real as it gets when you're in a fist fight. You know what I mean? Like then you have some dude over in Emeryville, like, saying racist shit to like kids leaving a store. It's like, I guess that stuff always happened and now it's exposed. And so that might be a good of social media, is like people like that like when you do catch people doing something rotten and fucked up and you can show the world, it's pretty rad.
It is, but I'm going to go with my takeaway from John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which is that public shaming feels like justice, but it is not. Justice is something we've spent a lot of time working on, and it's really imperfect, and it doesn't apply equally. And sometimes we can use something like social media to right that wrong, but that doesn't mean the means of using social media to use public shaming as leverage against people is the right solution. It sometimes feels like the right solution when it's applied in the way you want it to, but public shame is not justice. It's just shame. And due process is, I don't know. I'm for due process. I'm totally for people being called out when it's reasonable. And I don't like the fact that we live in a world where people get away with things far too often. That's just the world. But I don't believe in like ubiquitous surveillance and call out culture. Actually, I believe in due process as much as we can, because at least there's checks and balances. And in call out culture, in flame wars, in people attacking each other with memes, there's no due process.
No.
There's no reasonability. There's no checks and balances. It's just attack.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like a might makes right, which is like not based on reasonability. It's only based on force.
Yeah. Call out culture, just, I think I always think of as snitch culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it just like shut the fuck up, man.
Yeah.
Like, especially if it's not your particular fight. I don't know, man. Sometimes it's just fun seeing somebody get wrecked too, you know? I guess that's like chimpanzee behavior, but I don't know. I mean, what about ghetto fights online? That's got to be a social good, like getting to see like these great fisticuffs, these amateur boxers in various locales around the world, like Irish boxing or
what?
I don't know. Like
Ghetto
that's
fights?
Yeah, like people in like Ireland or like Baltimore or whatever. Like you know these like crazy videos of people fighting.
Do you mean like real street fights?
Yeah, real street fights.
Well, okay, wait. Is there a question? Do
Maybe
I think that's interesting, or is this a social good?
I'm saying maybe that is the social good to come from this, because those videos are hilarious.
We should keep Facebook so that we can watch.
Yeah, that's a bad
marginalized people street fight.
No. That's what World Star Hip Hop's for. I don't know. I'm just trying to basically I'm trying to think around okay, why is this good? But it's so crazy to think about here's the thing that caused a bunch of bad shit to happen. And you have trouble coming up with things that it's good for. And you still want it to be around. It's crazy, right? That's crazy. If you had a dog that just bit almost everybody that came in, and it had been around for a while and it was sort of entertaining, but that was it. You wouldn't keep that dog.
Some people would.
Yeah, some people would, I guess.
But yes, I completely agree. This is the thing I just don't understand.
I mean, the answer is obvious though. Money. You know, it's too much money to give it up. Back to Moloch.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have anything else to say about Facebook.
No, I have an awful lot.
Yeah,
I have way more rants about it, but I gotta stop.
Yeah.
But if you have some sort of as pithy, nihilist, bleak outlook on the world thing, you could again, I feel like you really just landed the plane so beautifully earlier, but we weren't done. And
maybe we should just end on that point that we made earlier, or figure out a way to get back to it and end on that. We can always do our usual what if. If you, well, let's just try this one out. If you were given the keys to any company on earth right now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a tech company, and you were the CEO, what company would you want to take over? And then what would you do? What would your 30, 60, 90 look like? Your 30 days, 60 days, 90 days plans, since you're not a drone in an office. You looked at me blankly. You're like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah, 30, 60, 90. Wait, people have structures for making plans with their life? That is totally foreign to me.
Well, if you took over a new position.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
can I run Saudi Arabia and just close shop?
Well, maybe we'll limit it out. If you could.
Can I just choose a country and just decide we're done?
No, you can't. See,
I can't stop Saudi Arabia from being a thing.
That's that secret Ayn Rand thing. You want to gulch it, take it off. Yeah.
See, I have been poisoned.
Yeah. Well, let's just say a tech company. You say it has to be a tech company. If it was a tech company, I think maybe the broad choice might be a problem. But if you had to, or not had to, but if you could be the CEO of any tech company in the Bay Area, which one would it be, and what would you do if you were in charge of it?
I don't know. That's tough. I don't know if I have enough imagination for that. I think because most of the companies I can think of, the most major tech companies in the Bay Area or in the world that I can think of, I would either want to shut them down because I can't think of how to turn them into something genuinely good, or if it was like I would take over Uber and just bring more opportunities to the drivers and close that gap between the savings for customers and what the drivers can actually be responsible for the drivers. Like invest more responsibility on the behalf of the company for what are absolutely employees. So in that circumstance, like these companies that are not very reliant, that make people so reliant on their product, but don't take very good care of their employees or their users or whatever, and just make it so that weren't so much the case. You know, Uber does not need all the money it makes, and that money is at the expense of real people. And I think it would just be some sort of like, make this company more fucking responsible. But I don't think I have a really great idea of like, oh, I could take this company and do this thing with it. I think that all these tech companies are either totally bullshit, just a complete waste of energy and time and resources, or they're doing something good and make it just slightly better in a very traditional sense. I think the most interesting thing would be like, and I don't have an answer, but like if I could run Amazon and think about how it could be less predatory, how it could not have the Walmart effect on the world. And I don't know that there's a solution, but it would be kind of amazing to be part of that solution, because it's, I think what it's doing is on one hand really useful, but on the other hand really short-sighted.
The board is definitely going to remove you as CEO from whatever company.
You can't just throw that in at the end.
It's like, so you would go against your fiduciary responsibility for the company in favor. Oh, you'd run a B corporation. I see.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah.
Well, okay, what about you?
I would buy Google, and I would shadow ban all politicians. Like what I would do is make it to where the pages that have their donation buttons and their most effective donation stuff, I would just drop that shit to the bottom of the Google page rank. So it's like on the 40th page, and just make it almost impossible for any politician to get any of their messaging on the front page of any Google thing. I would just basically try to completely bury political actors.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm totally behind that.
Yeah. See? You like fascism. I mean, this is probably the good philosophical point to end on here. It kind of all goes back to that Ring of Gyges thing, right? Like, I mean, do you know that particular the thing? Yeah. So maybe if our listeners don't know, there's this Greek story or old philosopher story. I don't know if it was Greek necessarily. There's a ring. It's a magic ring. You put it on, you can turn invisible. What do you do with the ring? The reason why it sounds familiar is because it's where the idea for the ring from Lord of the Rings came from. And in the dialogues, like I've had this conversation with a bunch of people like, okay, so you get the ring, what do you do? It's almost impossible to come up with something really good that is like just like a decent good. Like even if you're like, I'd steal food for poor people. It's like, great, you fed poor people, but you've also stolen food from hardworking people. It's like it's almost impossible to figure out some sort of like positive moral action.
Trap. That's what's the character from Watchmen, Mr. Universe?
Dr. Manhattan?
Dr. Manhattan,
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah, Dr. Manhattan, that's the conundrum, is like you become omnipotent, you just go amoral. Like what else can you do? You're just, it's so confounding how to do good, because when you're that powerful, the very idea of what can be good starts to disintegrate. Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
But you know, like when I would think of like, oh, if I could take over these companies, like, or if I could have ultimate control over like Facebook or something like that, what would I do? I mean, I'm just going to use it to smash something I don't like, and I don't think anyone would behave differently. And in that respect, it's kind of amazing that the company is as neutral as it is. You know, when like how corrupting it really could be. I mean, it's only like, I mean, who knows? It could be super corrupt underneath it or whatever, but that we don't know about. But I mean, they're definitely making a good show of it for being for everybody.
See, I would say that it is absolutely corrupt by nature, and it has a baffling amount of money knowing how to appear to people.
Yeah.
That's its nature, is to harness a certain belief about it, and interaction with it.
And it's so crazy is it's like, this is the metaphorical superstructure that would inform a new being's consciousness. So if you ever did get to like an AI, like an actual like movie AI, like the way like sci-fi thinks of it, it's going to learn how to behave in this environment where it is this weirdly built, amoral, but not really thing. I mean, how will it think of itself? Like if say Facebook develops an AI first, it's basically part of Facebook. It will be Facebook. You know, it's going to be a dickhead. Like, you just know it.
Yeah, if you don't have to have good manners.
Or if your manners are always good in a way that negates you even having manners.
Right.
You know, like you're doing whatever you want to anyway, but your manners are so great. You know, that was like the idea behind like Terrace Casuals and Jorge Henry's, like all these like groups of, well, Terrace Casuals are basically like soccer hooligans, but they would dress up really nice on days that they would go fight, and they'd be like, "Good day, ma'am," and they would try to be like super, super polite because underneath they're actually savages and they're about to go beat the fuck out of each other. But the outfits, and then the Jorge Henrys were like kind of the same thing, but fraternity guys in the East Coast in the 40s and 50s. They were basically like super rich East Coast guys, but the manners were it's sort of an American Psycho thing. Like the appearance of mannered behavior protects the actual deviancy underneath.
Yep.
Yeah, actual deviancy underneath.
Let's fade to black and roll the credits. If you don't already, subscribe and rate on iTunes and Stitcher this podcast, Scary Thoughts. Please join the mailing list. And we will see you next time for Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979 with our friend Alexa.
It should be fun. Don't forget to like us on Facebook.
Please do that. Bye. Thanks for listening. Is it too dark in here?
It's dark. It's darker than it was.